All right, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Cook. I'm a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm also Secretary of the College of the Royal Society of Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our session that's titled Interdisciplinary Responses to Global Challenges. We're very excited to have some public discussion and discourse around this topic, and we're hoping that you will be part of it. So we have a diverse and very informed panel that work in this interdisciplinary space, but we know you do too, and we're hoping that you will engage with us. So there's that question and answer feature that you should find at the bottom of your screen. We welcome you to provide comments, ask questions. You won't be able to do so orally. You'll only be able to provide your comments in written form. There's no way to unmute you. So what we're going to do is keep our eye on that question and answer section, and I will read questions and bring them to the floor at opportune times. Before we do that, we're just going to get rolling here with some introductions and a little bit of context. And so I'll start with context and then move on to introducing my colleagues today. And so I think if we look around us, there are many, many challenges that we face in the world today. And I think if we really dig into those problems, we realize that they're complicated, and they're complicated for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's because of sort of the technical or scientific aspects. Sometimes it's because, and oftentimes it's because of the people or the governance structures or conflict. And these are all things that make it difficult to solve problems. Yet at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. If you think of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which really are quite cross-cutting and encompass many of the huge problems that we face today, none of those problems are going to be solved by a single discipline or a single individual. So if you take something like food insecurity, sure, we need folks that work in the agriculture sector working on that, but we also need political scientists and economists, and it goes on and on and on. And I think you're going to hear that as a recurring theme today as we reflect on our experiences in working across various boundaries. I think as we have dealt with COVID over the last year, I think this has also become very apparent that this is not just an issue for the healthcare sector. We're seeing lots of scholarship recognizing that all of these issues are intertwined. And so I think this is also a very timely topic, admittedly one we came up with before COVID came along, but I think it has even more resonance today. Before we get rolling, I just want to spend a moment talking about the word interdisciplinary or interdisciplinarity. We recognize there are other modes of or terms that are operating in this space. So for example, the word multidisciplinary or the word transdisciplinary. And we're well aware that there are subtle but important differences between all of those domains. To simplify things today, we're going to roll with the generic term interdisciplinary, but we're considering it as a bit of an umbrella term, and we may be talking more about multidisciplinary frameworks in some cases, other times more transdisciplinary, but we're just going to try and simplify things and keep with that. And so with that, we're going to move on to introductions. And so you heard from me in terms of telling you who I am and where I'm based. So I'm going to tell you in another minute or so here, just a quick summary about my research space. And then we're going to go around the room here with my colleagues, and each of them will introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why they're on the panel. Where and how are they active in this space as interdisciplinary scholars? And so myself, I'm an applied fish ecologist. I study fish, and I've found through time I'm going back to my roots. I'm generating science. I'm putting papers on the shelf. I'm putting them on the desks in front of policymakers, and they aren't being used. And I found myself going back to my undergrad training. My undergrad was actually in environmental studies. And I've sort of realized that I can have the best science in the world. And if I don't understand the human dimension, I'm not going to be as effective as I could. And so for me, this has been sort of a natural transition, partly driven by frustration. It is not easy, nor always rewarding to work across these disciplinary boundaries, but I think the payoff can be huge. And it certainly has enriched my scholarship. I continue to learn every day because of it. And so that's why I'm active in this space and excited to be talking about it today. So next, we're going to do that around the room session. So first of all, I would like to welcome and introduce Professor Verena Vinivadar. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I would like to bid everybody a warm welcome too. I'm pretty impressed that we have 41 people in this room, if you can call it a room at the moment, of which only very few are us. So there's more than 30 people wanting to hear of us. Why am I here? At the Academy of Sciences of Austria, of which I am a full member, I am the chairperson of the Commission of Interdisciplinary Ecological Studies. And we actually do long-term studies. We also care a lot about biodiversity, not just fishes, but we also care about fishes, of course. And we are one of the few commissions that are joint commissions of the entire Academy and don't belong to one of the classes of the Academy. The longer history of my life is that I, for 6 years, had the honor and privilege to serve as the Dean of the Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies of the Alpen Adria University in Klagenfurt, which then actually was dismantled. And one of the stories I would want to share, if time allows, is why I think this faculty was taken apart and its different pieces were put into different universities. The other thing that I think brought me on this panel is my profession. I'm an environmental historian, and environmental history is as much about reconstructing how people perceived of the environment in the past, because perception is the prerequisite of action. So we reconstruct how people perceived things by looking at sources from humans. We also need to reconstruct how the environment was like. And that is only possible in interdisciplinary teams. So for many years, I've been heading teams that were very interdisciplinary, and for the past 10 years, I think I've pieced together with that team the history of Vienna as a city very much organized along rivers, some of which you cannot see anymore because they're now running subterraneanly as part of the Vienna sewage system. So that's what I'm doing and why I think I was invited on this panel. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Up next, Professor Lauren Flynn.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Flynn. I'm a professor at Western University and a member of the Royal Society College. I'm an engineer by training, but I have a real passion for biology, and at Western I have a joint faculty position between the faculties of engineering and medicine. So my research focuses on the development of cell-based therapies in regenerative medicine, and just by nature it's extremely interdisciplinary. And on all of the projects that I'm working on, it involves collaboration. So I look at my grants and they typically have 5 or 6 co-applicants on them because we can all bring different strengths. So I work with other engineers, with chemists, with biologists, immunologists, imaging scientists. And, you know, these are dealing with problems that are all rooted in science and technology, but even, you know, we can't be experts at everything. So I think by bringing things together, we can develop a much more in-depth understanding of what's happening in a complex environment. And so that's in the context of health, but I think that applies more broadly as well to a lot of different challenges. And I have a little bit of experience in trying to translate technology through commercialization, patenting a technology and trying to move it forward towards clinical trials. And I can say that brings in a whole nother layer of need for interdisciplinary work, working with people who are experts in law and technology with developing patents, but then, the business piece, and you can have the best technology, but if you can't get investment to be able to move it forward into actual practice, and then also obviously the ethics of the situation and ensuring you're bringing forward something that is safe and isn't going to have a detrimental effect. So I can appreciate the many layers of need for interdisciplinary and the importance that everyone brings a very useful perspective and an important perspective.
Thanks so much. All right, up next, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Professor Alexia Fernkrans-Preskowitz. Welcome.
Welcome also from my side, and I feel very honored to be on this panel today. And let me give you the background I'm coming from. So I'm trained in applied mathematics with application in economics and demography. I'm at the moment professor at the Technical University in Vienna, and I'm also deputy director of the Vienna Institute of Demography, which belongs to the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And I'm also a research scholar at the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. So you see already from my affiliations, I'm quite interdisciplinary. But let me really stress, I think it's really my background from the education, which really is a proof of interdisciplinarity, applied mathematics in economics and demography. But equally important, I would argue, is also looking back to my career, I was fortunate to have worked in interdisciplinary teams during the last years or decades, I have to say. And let me just stress a few of them. For example, I had 5 years at the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research in Rostock, where I was lucky to lead a group on the interaction between the population, the economy, and the environment. And not only did I have in my own group people from different disciplines, but at the institute, at the Max Planck Institute on Demographic Research, we had in the fertility lab and also in the mortality lab, we had really people from very different disciplines. You cannot understand demography if you don't understand biology, etc. And I think this is really important. And let me also mention another, I think, occasion where I have the chance to work together with others. I'm currently in a working group of the National Academy Leopoldina in Germany on demographic change. And there we are working together on this really global change of demographic change. We are really working together with different disciplines, including social sciences, of course, but also medicine, epidemiology, social history. I think if you don't know where we come from, we don't know where to go, I think. So it's really important to have social history in this as well. We have psychology in people. So it's a really great pleasure, I think, to work in this group, and we have already drafted several reports on the future of the aging of population. I will have opportunity to talk more about this. And finally, last but not least, let me also mention I'm involved in a doctoral program on water resource systems here at the Technical University. And that's extremely interesting. I'm there as a social scientist, but I'm working together with people from engineering, technical sciences. And my really big kind of goal is to understand human-induced global challenges really need, in a sense, many disciplines to answer the future questions. And I think it's really important if we don't involve humans, I mean, in this discussion, I think we cannot solve these problems. So I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Thanks so much. Last but not least, Professor Gerhard Handel.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to this session. I hope we will have a vivid discussion on this really exciting topic. My background is marine ecology, marine biogeochemistry and oceanography. I'm a professor here at the University of Vienna, and I'm also affiliated to the Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, where I have been working for 12 years before coming to Vienna. And doing marine science is essentially already interdisciplinary, of course, because when you do like research in the open ocean, you're typically together with physical oceanographers or chemists and biologists and microbiologists. So you get quite a spectrum already in order to explain like how the ecology of the ocean works. You cannot just look at an organism individually. You have to look at the whole complexity of an ecosystem. And I've been serving on the scientific steering committee of the International Marine Biogeochemistry and Ecosystem Research, which is an international panel where basically global marine issues are discussed. And this was for quite some time only like dealing with natural sciences. So only natural scientists were there involved. And over the last 5-6 years, also people from political sciences, from governance are included to address the changes the ocean and the problems the oceans are facing. So I learned how to communicate with political sciences and how to communicate with people involved in the governance of the ocean. So they are speaking different languages, which takes a while to get used to that. But overall, I found it extremely exciting. I mean, to address a problem from the different angles. And there are, like in the oceans, there are quite a number of problems, particularly like on the open ocean, which is not belonging to a single country. How do you like get some decent legislation, for example, on deep sea mining, which is a big issue at the moment, or how to preserve biodiversity, or how to regulate like this, if you collect genetic information, how is this regulated, and so on. So these are really issues which are not, I mean, of course, from natural sciences, they have quite a voice there, but there are quite a lot of legal issues, and so a complex governance structure which requires sort of interdisciplinary input from different fields of research, discussing this and coming up with a solution which is really sort of sustainable also. This is the ultimate goal, to come to a sustainable solution, a sustainable use of the ocean, for example.
Thank you. So I think it should be quite evident to you that we've got a really diverse group assembled here, and folks that certainly have relevant expertise to share with the masses. And so we're going to start off with a question here. And I want to remind you, I've got a number of questions I could ask, but we also want to hear from you. So please do not hesitate to use that question and answer feature, submit your questions, and we'll tackle them. And if you fail to do so, I'm going to keep asking you. So please do contribute your questions. So the first question, in my introduction, I touched on things like the Sustainable Development Goals and the many global challenges that we face, and local challenges as well. What I would like to hear from our panelists, and some of you touched on this already in your introductions, is why do we need to go down an interdisciplinary path? Why interdisciplinarity as opposed to staying in, you know, our little boxes where things are comfortable, where we know everyone, where we, you know, it probably aligns very closely with our training? Why do we step across that line? Why do we cross boundaries? Why do we engage in interdisciplinarity? And I'm going to start with you, Alexia.
So I'm always forgetting to unmute. So many thanks, I think, for asking me first. So basically, let me really go back to my main research area, and this is about the economics of aging. And when I started with the economics of aging, I really got in touch with people, of course, who are really experts on aging. Otherwise, I could not start with my models. And I think that's the best example. I mean, when you look at aging, I think it's not just something, a biological process. I mean, it's an important biological process. That's why I got in touch with these people. But I think it's extremely important to realize that it's the interaction between individual decision making. I mean, how you age, it's your lifestyle, it's a socio-cultural context. And I think this is really like requiring people from different disciplines. I think this is really like that many questions we are talking about today and nowadays, I think they really require different disciplines. I mean, and I have a colleague, I mean, Holger Strulik, for example, and he developed a really nice kind of aging in economic models, but it's really drawn on biological aging processes. So for me, this is extremely important. That's that answers the why, because otherwise we cannot answer the questions. And let me also say what I feel is a really big advantage, and it's a huge feature of interdisciplinarity, that we do know that many discoveries we have reached in the last years are really on the borders of different disciplines. So interdisciplinarity allows us also to have discoveries which are really important. And I think it's really kind of, in addition, I would argue like that it helps the single disciplines themselves. I would argue, and I'm coming also from the economics, I think, I mean, looking at psychology and behavioral sciences, I think economists have profited a lot. And so that's my argument. I think interdisciplinary also has a huge feedback on single disciplines to broaden their spectrum. So I think advances in disciplines themselves are really depending on really going into interdisciplinary research. And possibly I think I'll end here to leave the floor to others. And
Thank you. And we're going to go to Lauren next.
I think the thing when we look at these problems that we're talking about, these global challenges, is that they are inherently large and they're multifactorial. And I think that they also emphasize the need, how we need to think about how interconnected we all are on a global scale. And so if we just focus in on what we're working on, it's never going to be able to address these major interconnected problems. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic sort of highlights this. So recognizing the problem and as it spread on an international scale, and then the amazing development of biological tools, so vaccines, on such a rapid level to come up with new technologies to be able to address this problem. And that involves working together, on these problems just to tackle the biology and the technology of it, but then moving towards translating it and being able to scale up and produce on a global scale. But then that's just looking at the one side of it, and taking the other side, looking at different cultures and how to encourage people to accept this new technology and ensure that it's safe when we're translating it to the public. Looking at how different cultures may view the vaccine and being able to communicate with people and understand the importance of for global health, being able to accept the need for these vaccines. And this disease is constantly evolving and coming up with new variants. And, we may look at ourselves as a small community, but really this is something that has touched as being affecting all of us on a global scale. And so we need to start thinking about these problems. They aren't just local problems, they are international problems, and economics is involved, business, investment, so many factors, and there's no way that by focusing just on one small discipline that we would be able to translate any of these therapies onto the public.
Thank you.
I guess I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks. Gerhard.
Yeah, thank you. There are, of course, different aspects on a global scale, on a more local scale. I experienced that, for example, when I was working in the Netherlands. The institute was on a large island in the North Sea where quite a large percentage of the population were fishermen. And of course, we were working on studying the North Sea, and there is this problem of overfishing. So the easiest would be, because the fishery in the North Sea is not really economic anymore, so it needs to be sustained quite a bit by taxpayers' money. And the solution would be very simple. To say, well, stop fishermen and give them some unemployment benefit, and they don't need to fish. It would be easier and cheaper, of course, but from the socioeconomic point of view, this is not an option. So you have this, on one hand, from the biology and from the ecology, a clear message, and then comes the socioeconomic aspects, and then you have to find solutions, which is not that easy. You cannot say just don't fish, but you have to smoothly transform society. And this is, I think, something what is not, this was an example of the North Sea, and this is where we are now when we talk about all these global warming and climate change issues. It needs transformative processes. And for a long time, I mean, there were ecologists, meteorologists monitoring, measuring temperature, monitoring climate changes, measuring carbon dioxide increases and so on. So there is clear evidence, but now finding solutions to that. So science provided evidence, like in the IPCC reports, it's a tremendous information gathered there. But now the challenge is, and this is an interdisciplinary problem, so here we have some facts, and the facts are, and the data are still collected, and then there are some socioeconomic boundaries. And so how do we transform and how do we get like into a more sustainable use of our resources? And this is one of the biggest challenges we are facing at the moment when you talk about interdisciplinary. I mean, we have to get together the scientists from all these different fields with all their expertise, bringing it on the table and discuss how, from their point of view, how solutions can be found. And this is, I think, will take a lot of effort and a lot of communication between the different disciplines. And I find that this is not done to the extent it should be done. I mean, we are more breathing in our own soup a bit and boiling in our own soup, but I think we should, there should be more emphasis put on like these interdisciplinary aspects, as Alexia also mentioned on the aging with all these different facets. I mean, there is even a bigger challenge when we think of like how to make sustainable living really on our planet.
Thank you. And Verena, on to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I can make 3 points here on 3 different aspects. Let me start with the epistemological aspect. I think that what we are talking about here is not as such applied science, but it is problem-oriented science or problem-oriented scholarship in a more general level sense. And why do we feel so at home in our disciplines? That has to do with the fact that disciplines are actually about disciplining one into a particular methodological bucket. And the problems that you can see when you sort of hang in this bucket and look out are only the ones that fit in your bucket. The methods that you apply will make you construct the problems in a way that you can tackle them with your own method. And that is why they don't have much to do with what there is as a problem outside. Only by the constant irritation of your own view from your own methodological bucket by people in their other buckets will you be able together to look at the space in which you are swimming, at the great big sea, to make Gerhard Handel happy. Yeah? So when you're thinking of your own little boat, it is more cozy than reaching out into the water, because the water is always irritating. And that's the epistemological question here. The second one is a question of which translates very well into the social studies of science realm. The social studies of science realm, what I'm talking about here, is picking up on Alexia's point. Innovation within the scholarly realm has always depended on crossing boundaries. And therefore it cannot happen in the middle of the most secure knowledge. It always happens on the margins. And the best possible way to stay at the margins is to constantly cross the boundary to another discipline. And that's why it is so extremely productive. And that's why I think it should feature at a much larger space in our master studies and of course in PhD training. And Christiane Wendehorst in the Q&A has asked if we think that the universities are doing a sufficiently good job in preparing students. My answer is no, we don't. And one of the frustrations that I have is that the skills that you need, I think you need 2 skills, and that has been called the T competence model. Yeah, you have your disciplinary in-depth competence. Now that you need. Yeah, but you also need to make this into a good T. You also need communication competences, and going out of your own depth into the broad spectrum. And I think that we're very good at this part, and we're very, very bad at that part. And we also happen to call this soft skills, which I would want to eradicate from our vocabulary. These skills are not soft. A, they are hard to acquire, and B, they are just as important as the others. And as you can see, both my pens are hard. None of them is soft. Now, very quickly, and picking up on what Martin Gerzabek has asked here in the chat function, I don't think that we just deal with complexity here. We deal with what has been called wicked and super wicked problems, which is emergent properties that nobody has been expecting. Yeah? And in order to be prepared for those surprises, being surprised by your own colleagues across the boundaries of disciplines is probably one of the best trainings that you can get. I think we can provide practical examples here, but what I would like to point out is that what I'm working on is wicked legacies. Yeah, the legacy spots where you have extreme toxicity in the ground or in the environment that comes from long-lasting activities. Now, the difference between a wicked legacy and a monster of a legacy is not the technical question. It's not the toxicity. The main issue here is corruption. If you have a corrupt, failed state with a toxic piece of soil, you have a massively greater problem than if you have that same toxicity in a good governance state. So without crossing disciplines here and seeing the problem as a problem also of corruption and not just of toxicity, there is no solution. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And thanks to our audience participants. We've got a couple questions in there now. The one that Verena just touched on about training, a question from Christiane. We're going to come back to that one towards the end of the session today. What do we need to do to prepare the next generation? But let's just take a moment and dig into the second question that was submitted by Martin. And Martin asked, so I'll read it for folks, the global systems are extremely complex. How can we manage to combine the necessary technical depth with the equally necessary interdisciplinary overview within the framework of our research? Can you provide any practical examples? And so I'm not going to go to everybody, so just looking to my colleagues here, if there's somebody, Verena already touched on that partly in her answer. Is there anybody else that would like to weigh in on that? I'm going to go to you, Lauren.
Yes, I think for me, one of the most important things is that we can't do it alone, and the importance of collaboration. So I like Verena's analogy of the T, but I think we need to have a very strong base of our T where we're bringing together multiple people. There's no way that when we're tackling these problems, one person can bring that technical depth. And so the key is that we need to recognize who are those different players that together we can bring the technical depth that is required, but that we also know how to talk to one another effectively. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned from experience is that we all talk a slightly different language and we don't necessarily even realize it at times. So learning who we can reach out to, who is open to this type of collaboration as well, because some people prefer, so not everyone is great at collaborating or working on interdisciplinary problems. So finding those people who are also equally motivated, wanting to like learn those other languages so that you can work together and then have that strong talk team where you're actually communicating with one another. And I think that, you know, in it, what's extremely important is that we recognize that everyone at that base of that T is important so that we have a strong, solid base. Everybody's contributing important knowledge. Not one overrides the other, or else we're going to end up with ineffective collaboration and not working together. So I think that's, you know, and it's only through experience that we can gain this knowledge of how to talk to one another and how to work together effectively. And so, you know, I think that we'll weigh into the discussion on where universities need to go in terms of giving people the opportunity to learn how to talk to one another and learn about different fields and appreciate their value.
Thanks. Alexia, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to move on to our next question, and we'll start with you, Gerhard, for our next question.
Yeah, since we were asked for a practical example, let me give a practical example, I think, and this is the doctoral program on water resource systems at the TU Wien. And I just joined what Lauren and Verena already said. I think it's really important to be open-minded. So what we are doing in this doctoral school, we have kind of a training in engineering, social sciences, etc. So we are trying to bring the interest of the people to the same level. But let me clearly outline, we are not bringing like that everyone will be a specialist in the other's field. I think this is really important. So we do also want to have comparative advantage of the single persons, but we want that they work together on the same problem. And I think this is so important that you have a common kind of goal, a common problem you want to solve. For example, I did a study together with a colleague from engineering, and we were interested in material flow analysis, which is a quite a descriptive technical argument of the phosphorus cycle. But we really wanted to understand how firms, how consumers react to it. How do they take up specific quotas or something in recycling or whatever. And I think this was really kind of, I did bring in the comparative advantage, my people doing a PhD from the economic side, and they brought in, of course, their engineering, their kind of technical experience. And in the end, I think we have a really nice study, and I think we can really sell it and we can show that we have additional insights. I think it's the drive of the single people being involved in interdisciplinary research which really drive interdisciplinary research. I mean, if you don't have this drive together to solve the same question, I think it's difficult. And as Verena and Laureen said, it's not something you can impose on people. You can offer it to people and you can see who takes it up. And I think this is how we have to go ahead.
Thank you. So over the last 10, 15 minutes, we've really focused on sort of the why of interdisciplinarity. And I think for all of us, and hopefully for all of you, it's very evident why we go down this path. And I think if you were to look in the strategic plan of every university on the planet, you will see the word interdisciplinary appear somewhere, somehow, yet there are barriers. There are many barriers at various levels to actually engaging in interdisciplinary research and scholarship and bringing such approaches to bear on the problems of today. And so that's where we're going to go next. What are the barriers? And so we're going to start with that, and then we're going to move on to what are some of the strategies for overcoming those barriers. So we're going to start off with Gerhard here.
Well, I think, one of these barriers, at least in Austria, not so much in other European countries, but in Austria particularly, there is not really much of funding available on the governmental side. There are some possibilities like teaming up with companies or with or on an international level. For example, I'm involved in marine plastics initiatives, working together with like the Ocean Cleanup initiative funded by a Dutch young entrepreneur. So there are possibilities, but these possibilities are limited to do research really. So from the funding side, one would see to do more here on a national level. On the European Union level, there is with the Horizon 2020 program and also with the next framework program, there is quite some room for interdisciplinary research, but for my taste, there is so much bureaucracy involved in that this is, for me at least, not very attractive. Although I'm participating in an interdisciplinary research program on the Arctic Ocean, defining tipping points in the Arctic, but I'm not coordinating this. This is coordinated out of Denmark. So there are, like from these national funding agencies, there are limited resources available to do interdisciplinary research. One can, of course, do some more, move more into applied research by seeking interactions with companies or societies. This is a possibility, but from national funding agencies, there is clearly, I see, a lack in funding possibilities.
And Gerhard, I can assure you that it's more or less the same in Canada. There have, in the last few years, been some new opportunities, but it's still early days. Things are moving in the right direction, but that is certainly a challenge we face here. Next, I'm going to Verena.
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of the great things about the European Research Council are the synergy grants that we have. And I was involved in a mock interview for a team with a synergy grant. And one of the main questions there is, what is the difference between you all getting your own projects and you doing something together? And if you can't answer this question, then you're not going to get that synergy grant money. And that's real money. That's several million euros. So the European Union, at least the European Research Council, clearly has understood the message here. And by the way, Gerhard, this is an ocean thing. It's called 4 Oceans, and it's a global marine history. So, and they've got it, and environmental historian Paul Holm is the principal investigator on that, and I think we're gonna hear lots from them in the future. So I think that yes, funding is a barrier. But what Christiane Wendehorst asked, do we sufficiently prepare people? That is another barrier. The barrier is that training is, and that by training I mean university training, is disciplinary in origin, and the structural differences in the universities with departments and stuff like that, they sort of prolong this into the indeterminate future. What I've seen, and like Alexia, I have been supervising interdisciplinary PhDs, I think a handful at least. These young people really suffer from too much decisions to be made. Do I publish this stuff in that journal, which is more a humanities-based journal, where they want me to do footnotes and they want me to start with an example, yeah, and there have to be people in there, because if there are no people in there, why should we publish it? It's a humanities journal, and then you can take that same stuff, which is on how humans and rivers have interacted in the past, yeah, and you can put that into a river journal where they will say, well, but it's not really systemic. There's too many actors in that. It's kind of hodgepodgey. So can't you do that more data-based? And then this poor PhD student sitting there and wondering, so how am I going to carve out a career in this messy space? And I'm trying to, and they also, they don't know how to actually create an interdisciplinary narrative. They either do, introduction, methods and materials, results, discussion. That's the normal way how you publish in Nature, yeah. Or you have this, hey, there's not even a method section in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History. Huh? They don't have method section. How can you judge the quality of this? So I think that there are a lot of structural barriers when young people want to enter this and want to do that, also in that the impact points of these journals on which nobody in their right senses should ever judge the quality of any paper, but everybody does that, which is wrong, but it makes interdisciplinarians suffer way more than disciplinary scholars. So that's a real barrier. And it's, pardon me, it's also dumbness of evaluators, which is a real barrier here. But I think I should shut up now.
Excellent. And one of the things that I took away from that is that we need to figure out how to make it less messy. So I guess that's a challenge for all of us. So going to go to Lauren next.
Yes, absolutely. You know, funding is going to be a barrier. The limited available funding, the competitiveness that's out there for the available funding, I think absolutely there needs to be more investment. And then coming with these interdisciplinary projects, it does raise challenges in assessing these grants. So when people are applying for them, because the expertise is so broad, if you're just getting assessed by, you know, a very small number of reviewers, it becomes hard to really appreciate the scale of the project if it's truly interdisciplinary. And so, you know, you can run the risk of getting sort of, you know, the wrong person assessing it necessarily and not appreciating the broader overview, looking only at a very, very narrow piece. So we need, you know, to help develop a more interdisciplinary framework for assessing these interdisciplinary projects as well. Other sort of barriers that I can see are time, you know, and as academics, we have many hats to wear, and I find that it can be very challenging. You know, I'm hugely motivated by research. I'm very passionate about doing research, but I have lots of other important things that I need to do with teaching. And in engineering in particular, the teaching demands are very high. So I spend a lot of time on my teaching too, as well as service. And so it becomes having focused time and dedicated time for research for people working on these projects. I think being able to facilitate that is extremely important. Otherwise, the progress is going to stagnate. And then the other thing is assessment, and you know, within the academic system, how we are assessed. And you know, I remember when I started out as a faculty member, I was told you need to have projects that are just you, that you're only doing yourself, so that people know that it's you. Otherwise, nobody's going to give you credit for that work. And I you know, found that kind of disheartening because my work is interdisciplinary, and they said that, you know, even if somebody's a middle author, if they're more experienced than you, they're going to get the credit. And so, you know, I worked through that system. I did have projects that were collaborative. I did have projects absolutely that I just absolutely did by myself. All of the students were only working under my supervision. And now I'm at a career stage where I don't feel that, you know, I have enough of a foundation, but I don't think that's the right view. The sort of bean counting exercise that we go through to judge our measures, you know, there needs to be a better system there, because people who, you know, just because you're new and young doesn't mean that you're not contributing. You could be absolutely leading an interdisciplinary effort, and that needs to be encouraged rather than smothered.
Excellent. And Alexia?
Yeah, I think almost everything has been said. Let me just support this and just stress, I think, one of the main important points I think all of you made. I think it's basically that the promotion structure at our universities is rather aligned to single disciplines, and that's a huge problem, of course, which might be something which takes time. But we should not wait for this. And I think what we can do in between, I think, are several options. I mean, one option is to really give young people time, let them expose to interdisciplinary work, give them sabbaticals, send them to centers where interdisciplinary work is being done. I think we should really do this much more, and we need more funding, I think, as Gerhard already mentioned. But my feeling is often that there are a lot of calls on interdisciplinarity, and then it's rejected at the end, because my feeling is that we are not yet trained to evaluate interdisciplinary projects. And I think this is also something which I would really like to stress, that we have to start training how to evaluate interdisciplinary proposals, interdisciplinary research. I think that's extremely important. And let me also mention, I think there's one point, I think it's the appreciation of people doing interdisciplinary work. I think there are a few of them which are very well accepted. They can publish in high-level journals, but I would still argue that many of them are not yet well accepted and in the public and in the science field. So I think it's the appreciation of interdisciplinarity which is extremely important in all fields. And again, from my own background, demography, economics, mathematics, my feeling is, I mean, that it's extremely difficult still, I think, to get into main journals in economics or demography with something interdisciplinary. So I think this is where we really have to start breaking up these borders also in these kind of journals. And again, we can only do this by starting how to evaluate interdisciplinary research. So we should have evaluations, having interdisciplinary people on board of these evaluation processes. And I think that's equally important as announcing all this kind of interdisciplinary research.
Great. And I can tell you're all problem solvers because almost all of you gave us a barrier and then told us how to overcome it. I'd just like to, which is where I wanted to go next, but you've largely gone there already. But I just want to see if there's any other points or anything that folks want to play off in terms of strategies for overcoming these barriers. You know, we've talked about the need for more diverse, different funding pods, training the evaluators, retweaking the system. Gerhard, going to go to you.
Yeah, maybe I can add something what has been said by Alexia. I mean, there was actually an initiative from the Dutch Science Foundation to reserve money for interdisciplinary research on the North Sea. And then we wrote proposals from different fields. And then we got the evaluation back. And then it was sort of funny. Because one reviewer said, well, this part was completely not understandable. And the other reviewer said, this is the most innovative part of the proposal. So it is really, I mean, it's also, as reviewers, one needs also to be trained. But one aspect, I think, which gives hope is really that it becomes more and more common when we talk about sustainability, for example, to team up with like economists and biologists, for example, when it comes to fisheries. So how many fish do we land? What is the economic value of biodiversity? And so there is quite, I feel that I would see this more optimistic. There is a tendency that we are getting aware of the necessity, and occasionally we also don't need large research grants to do this. I mean, we have a lot of data accumulated in all kinds of different fields. We can dig into the data without getting a large proposal funded or so. There are problems one can address from different angles, which can be really done in a collaborative effort without asking for additional funding. It's also, I think this is what I want to say, it's also up to us to be open-minded, be aware and ready to address sort of problems and to interact with each other. I don't think always just saying and blaming the funding agencies that we don't get money for interdisciplinary research is only one side of the coin. Of course, this is important and it would be an important sign as well, but it is also a bit on us because for addressing some questions where interdisciplinarity is needed, I mean, we can do it. We just have to be ready for it.
Great, thanks. Sabrina.
Yeah, there's several things that one can say that gives one hope. One is I've been involved in the advisory board of an currently running and soon to be finished EU project called SHAPE ID, Shaping Interdisciplinarity, and they have put out several policy papers already. They have a fabulous website in the making where people who have no experience yet with interdisciplinary can go there, and it's a huge literature review basically, but it's thematically organized. So if I want to know, I think I have a problem that I can only tackle in an interdisciplinary fashion. How can I do, how can I create a team? And then you get the right literature. So it helps people navigate this field. So Shape ID is a good thing. The second thing that I would like to say is a colleague of mine in Australia, Gabriele Bammer. She has put together a fabulous blog on interdisciplinarity where people actually write about their experiences. And I think that this is one thing that we've tried with a journal I was on the board of for a long time called Gaia. We wanted to do something which we call design reports, where you could publish the design of your interdisciplinary project, because there is no venue to share these design questions. And I think all of us who have experience in designing these projects knows that this is one of the crucial moments. How is it going to work or not depends on how you envisage the way through that project, and how do you bring these people in. Now I say some disciplines work like very hot cayenne pepper. Yeah, you only need a little bit, and some others work like the potatoes. You need a lot of that, and don't mess up with the recipe here. Yeah, so I think that this is there is with Gabriele Bammer, and she calls what she wants to do, she calls integration and implementation science. And I think that's very smart not to call it interdisciplinary, because that doesn't link back to that disciplinary thing so much. It talks more about what it should be doing. I think there's a lot of stuff out there which is really good. And Katri Hutoniemi in Finland has published fabulous stuff on the evaluation of inter and transdisciplinary research. So I think we can all learn from one another. And Steve, you pointed that out in the introduction. Listen to those people who've already done it. Yeah, I think that would greatly help. If nobody, I mean, we all reinvent the wheel all the time, I think, and we could help other people to determine that a round wheel works much better than a square one.
So I'm going to move us along, and we've got a question comment that came in from George here that's quite an interesting one, I think. So he suggested that the challenges are not just complex, but they require urgent action. So there's some urgency. We could talk about climate change. We could talk about the biodiversity crisis. We could talk about COVID. So how do universities, academies, scholars respond to these urgencies and contribute to solutions and actions, recognizing things like, for example, Lauren very, stated that it takes time to do this kind of work. Obviously, if we needed to do things in sequence, that also takes a lot of time. So working together, but it takes time and care to do interdisciplinary scholarship. So how do we navigate that space? How do we get to solutions quickly in this space? Any thoughts? It's a bit of a stunner.
Well,
with Gerhard?
Well, I mean, there are differences, like quite some universities are still organized pretty much in a monodisciplinary approach. I mean, you have like plant science, you have zoology, you have like talk about ecology, you have these different pillars, and you have chemistry and so on. And to my taste, in Europe, particularly like in Central Europe, it is more difficult to change departmental structures than it is like elsewhere. Like in the Netherlands, they respond much quicker to developments. So I think what we should more envision and what we should strive for is to bring together in single departments from researchers from different fields, because this is important. I mean, to have like interactions when you go out of your office and having coffee after the COVID pandemic. It will be possible again, probably, just to have a chat over a coffee, and this is quite stimulating. And I think this is a bit missing at the universities, at research institutions, where I've been at the Marine Science Institute in the Netherlands. There were different fields represented, which you would just bump into each other over lunch or over coffee break and so on. And this stimulates. And universities are, from their tradition, more, the departments are more structured in a monodisciplinary way. At least at the University of Vienna, it is definitely the case. And it's also a bit difficult to change that, because you have the faculties and you cannot move a department out of one faculty, because then the dean says no way. and so on. So there are also some hurdles there, like purely bureaucratic hurdles. One can of course overcome that by nevertheless interacting with others, but I think it is much nicer to have a department where you come together from the different fields and you have regular contact.
Thanks. And Alexia has something to share.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question by Georg Kasa, and it's difficult to answer, but just two comments, I think. I mean, my feeling is really like the urgency requires, as you have written in your question, immediate or actions in the near future. But I think this is really something that we include stakeholders from the beginning, that we not only do research and then we present our results, but I think the COVID crisis has nicely shown this. And I, just as an example, you all know, I think Niki Popper now in Austria, who is doing all these simulations. And I think there are several other people, of course, and they are really involved from the beginning on. They change their models depending also with discussion on stakeholders. So there should be a continuous interaction with stakeholders from the beginning on, and it should be driven like more as we are having our expert kind of knowledge. I mean, we are not giving policy advice. I think that's very difficult, and we possibly should not do in a sense, but we should give our expert knowledge, I think, from the beginning on, and interact with stakeholders from the beginning on. And regarding climate change and many of these global challenges, my feeling is really, I think that we are often doing the mistake to really try to change human behavior within a year or 2 years or 3 years. That's not something we can really do that quickly. I think what we really have to better understand, I think, how people, I mean, have to get the incentives in a sense to really change their attitude, their behavior, their perception, etc. But this is something like a momentum effect, I think, which takes time. So at the other hand, we have also to think about which technologies, which possibilities we have in science to adapt also to humans. I think it has to be a two-way interaction and not a one-way interaction we're often doing in many of the sciences where humans are involved, I think. And these are just two of my comments.
Great. And Alexia, with a very clear shout out for co-production, co-assessment models, which are certainly gaining in popularity. Next, Verena.
Yes, thank you. So two things. One of those T's, yeah, is just one person with his or her in-depth disciplinary competence and his or her interdisciplinary communication competence. But a team is made of several of those T's. And only if you have a T, people can sort of put one T after the other, and then they can put something which will perhaps look like Stonehenge, yeah? So a ring of T's that is all supported together. And then if you strengthen these upper links, then you can also actually have a very, very good basis to answer questions that none of those disciplinary competencies could ever answer. That why I'm saying this at this point here is because the solution to rapid response is large teams. And large teams have opportunity costs. That's true. Yeah? But large teams of good T's actually work very well together. And rapid responses is not something that I invented. That is one of the things that the UN does in rapid response reports on urgent matters. And probably the best thing that was out there ever with regard of the SDGs is that report by Wolfgang Lutz and others of the independent panel of scientists called The Future is Now. But also because of a team effort, they were able to put something out rather quickly. And this is where, I mean, why are we talking here at a joint academy meeting? Because I think that at least Akatech, the German technical academy, and also the Leopoldina, the German Academy of Sciences, they have shown that by drawing on this huge pool of excellent people from all walks of scholarship, they've been able to put out reports on, e.g., food security as it is impacted by COVID within weeks. And I think that this is the way to go. If it's urgent, then get together a large team, get together a few people who can act as translators between those realms who have the experience of leading large interdisciplinary teams, and let them work. They will get out with even with answers to urgent questions. But if you want to have implementation, don't talk down to the public. This is what I think I got also from Alexia and also from Gerhard and the fishermen. All of us have to respect that people who have no academic training have to have a say if any of what we know ever gets implemented.
Excellent. So a great shout out for respecting and embracing different ways of knowing something, certainly in Canada with our Indigenous people, when we think of rights holders as well as stakeholders, something that's certainly front of mind for us here. We're going to move along, and our next question is, when is an interdisciplinary approach counterproductive, if ever? You know, just because one can do interdisciplinarity, is it always the right tool or the right approach for the job? And we're going to start with Lauren.
I think one of the things that I when I looked at this question, what came to my mind is the importance of also supporting independent investigator-led, fundamental research, and that, while working across disciplines, I think is hugely important. As we sort of translate these things, everything needs to be, we need to have a foundation to build. So planting those early seeds. And so sometimes it's not that interdisciplinary research is counterproductive. It's just not ready for that stage yet. So I think that, we don't want to move to a model where funding is only for interdisciplinary projects, or they're this top-down, this is what's going to get funded, these are the problems, because we need to develop those tools, for the next set of problems, right? We don't want to be reactionary. We want to sort of nurture the entire community. And so I think that is sort of my view, is that we need to have the right balance when we're fostering research, that we're fostering both independent researchers in their own areas to develop those strong tools that ultimately we can bring together to form the interdisciplinary foundation.
Well said. And I think there's oftentimes a bit of a tension there, and I think we need to support and embrace both. It's not either or, it's a continuum, and we need it all. Who else would like to weigh in on this one? I'd love to hear a story of where there's also been a failure in this space. If anybody has a good failing forward story. So Verena, you next, and then we'll go on to Gerhard. Thanks.
No, Gerhard is smiling so much. I want to hear his story first.
No, it's, I will not tell what I really mean, but I mean, we have sort of a curriculum which is more interdisciplinary. So there are master students coming in from different fields. And the problem there, what we are facing is that some have more training in chemistry, but nothing at all in biology, or they are coming from geology and don't know anything about another field. And it is really difficult to get them sort of on the same level. And so they know a bit from everywhere, but does not really work to that extent we would have wished to have that. So this sets a bit of, also shows the problem a bit. So if you start up with that, they have all their bachelor degree in a different area, and then you bring them together, and then you cannot expect that you have them within one semester or so on the same level. And so on one hand, I mean, I think we need to have sort of, for the students, they have to have a solid base somewhere. That's at least my opinion. And once they have this, then, and this is like within a master or a PhD curriculum, you should be open to related fields, and you should be aware of, like, for example, in sustainability and biodiversity and mass extinction problem. For example, there are people from political sciences and from natural sciences in one class, and you tell different people tell their view on sustainability and the problems on our planet and so on. This works, but they have a base somewhere in a specific field when they are doing their PhD, and I think it is necessary to be somewhere really specialized. And based from there, once you are specialized, you can open up and see problems more with a helicopter view, sort of.
Thanks. We're going to go back to Verena, and then Alexia would like to share some thoughts.
I have recently been invited to review a paper, and I'm not going to say anything about it, so I'm not going to violate any rules here, but the paper was extremely superficial. It was written by somebody who was only able to read secondary literature, but no sources. And by sources, what I'm talking about is the material in the different languages. If we are talking about the history of ideas, yeah, language matters. Now we're happily chatting along in the Anglo-Saxon dominant universe now. Yeah, actually, my native language is German, and some of the words just don't translate. Like, for instance, Urwald, yeah, which is not the same as primeval forest or virgin forest. It just comes with a completely different backpack of meaning. So this paper was extremely superficial because this person was only capable of reading in one language and was using secondary information, and it was brand marked as interdisciplinary, because this person was talking about a natural science question from the viewpoint of cultural anthropology. Interdisciplinary becomes counterproductive if it's not taken seriously. If it's taken as something that you can do as an aside, yeah. So yeah, I'm publishing in so and so, but I'm also doing interdisciplinary research. And unfortunately, that does happen. And then it also becomes counterproductive for all those people who frame their questions in an interdisciplinary way, because I think that is the real question. Not the answers, but if you formulate a question that you cannot answer with the methods of your own discipline, but in order to formulate the question, you've already bridged the gaps. Yeah? That is devalued by superficial quasi-interdisciplinary stuff, which saddens me, but it happens.
Hold on one second. Sorry, I've got a child that just joined me. Alexia.
Thanks a lot. So in fact, I'm just supporting what Verena said, and this was one of my main points. I think It's difficult to answer whether it's counterproductive, but I would never see interdisciplinary just from the onset. I would really let it driven by the question we are interested in. And I mean, the point I would really like to make, I think the scale of the problem makes a huge difference. And when I talk about scale, I really mean something like, are we looking at the local, global level? Are we looking at a dynamic process or a static process? And let me give us an example again, the COVID crisis. My feeling was when the COVID crisis really started last year in January, February, I think the most immediate, of course, answer was to really understand the evolution of the epidemics. I mean, we had really, I think, simulations, we had really epidemiology in it and so on. And during the time, I think, we really realized that we need, I think, a lot of behavioral sciences, I mean, to have people accepting our measures. And this is something, what I'm saying is, I think this interdisciplinarity would have had not been fruitful if we would have started at the beginning already, because it takes too much time to get data to understand it. I think we have to react quickly, and then we have not the time maybe to do everything interdisciplinary, and we even don't see which disciplines we need in the beginning. But over time, as these problems evolve, I think we realize, I mean, which disciplines additionally we need to understand. And I think this is really something, I would even say that interdisciplinarity itself depends on the problem evolution over time. And I think COVID is a really good example. I would argue now that we really need psychology, behavioral sciences, much more as in the beginning to really get out of this. I think fatigue during the lockdowns we observe and during many problems we see at the moment.
I've seen lots of head nodding among our panelists here. This is fantastic. We're going to move along to the last question, structured question that I have. I'd like to remind all of our friends in the audience to submit any additional questions that you have. And the last question that we wanted to tackle is really about what we need to do to ensure that the next generation of problem solvers have those necessary skills to engage in interdisciplinary scholarship and action and actually move some of these problems forward, help to solve them. And that also connects back to an earlier question from Christiane, who asked, do you feel our universities are doing a sufficiently good job in preparing their students? And I think in general, we would probably say probably not so much. And so that's where I want to go next. So what do we need to do to help prepare that next generation? And I'd like you to think about it at two levels. One, that undergrad foundation, but also the grad school as well. Those are different things because only a fraction of folks actually go on to grad school. We need everybody working on these problems. So, so with that, Lauren, do you mind if I start with you first?
Yes, you know, I think absolutely we need to be doing better, right? That our university structures are from the foundation with undergrad. You're tending to work within your department or within your faculty, and oftentimes even within a faculty, you have very little interaction with people outside of your program. So electrical engineers, for example, don't talk to chemical engineers, even though, you know, even within that field, there's a lot of, you know, crossover when they're going into the workforce. I think that, you know, the thing that I've learned is that you can't undersell the value of experience. And so we need to start thinking bigger about how we can foster an environment where students from different disciplines starting in the undergrad can come together and tackle relatively large open-ended problems. And I think that's the thing also that I see coming out from undergraduate is that oftentimes students aren't used to dealing with a problem that has more than one answer or potentially no answer. And so we need to give them these problems to tackle, give them the opportunity to work with students outside of their area, you know, bring the social sciences together with the sciences, together with the business students, and you know, give them the opportunity to talk to one another. I think the challenge though is that how do you do this? So where are the resources? This is going to take a lot of time and energy, and how do you assess? And so, you know, developing those structures, I think it is going to be a challenge, but something that is going to, you know, pay off tenfold. So even if students don't necessarily, you know, overcome a huge challenge in the undergrad. At least they're beginning to learn the tools that they need to talk to one another and try to address these problems, so that when they go out into the world, they aren't starting from a very narrow spectrum, that they have an appreciation for what's involved.
Great, thanks. Who'd like to go next on this one? Gerhard, perhaps you?
Yes, maybe. Well, I think what we could do for the next generation is to look at a specific problem from a different angle. To give you an example, for example, when we discuss about like organically grown food, using less pesticides and so on, one could also think, well, okay, we don't need less technique, but we might need more technique. For example, thinking of having greenhouses instead of our field. I mean, we are doing agriculture like 2,000 years ago, more or less, except that we put a lot of fertilizers on the fields. But there is technology now where we have greenhouses where we could harvest like 3 times a year, not just once. So, and this would save a lot of space and would leave a lot of space for nature, what we are using now for agriculture, for example. So, which means combining biological, ecological questions with technology. And the same holds true for sustainability aspects, because we are discussing like sustainability or reducing the carbon footprint only from a perspective that you should not do this, you shouldn't fly, you shouldn't do that. And we are not focusing so much on what might be the aspects which increase the quality of our life. By doing that. So bringing new perspectives into that, and not just hitting always the beaten track. Like, for example, when you talk about sustainability, I mean, we should look at it in a positive way. What would be possible if we would do that, not what we should not do all the time. And this also would, I think, stimulate and make the next generation thinking of finding new solutions maybe.
Over to you, Verena.
I think that what Georg Kasa, who's a climatologist, tackled with this question of the urgency, I would like to pick up on that. What we are now in as sustainability researchers is the age of post-normal sciences, where the urgency is great, the stakes are high, and there is little social contract or little social consensus on either the problem or the measures. Which means that we have yet to come up with curricula that teach post-normal scientists. I'm teaching in a course, and I think Alexia is also teaching at the Diplomatic Academy. I'm teaching in a course which is called ETIA, Environment, Technology and International Affairs, a great master's program, because it actually bridges the gaps here. But I think every university could come up with 4 learning goals. You know, I don't know how you are doing this in Canada, but we are supposed to have learning goals on every course. Okay, the learning goals that I think would be the sea change towards interdisciplinarity are patience, courage, trust, and humility.
Great. Thanks. And we're getting near the end, folks, so we're going to start to wrap things up. And what I'm going to do is a quick tour de table. I want to go around the room here, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists for one word with a that to them describes what interdisciplinarity is or why they do it. And I'll go first just to model this. So the word that I am going to use is learning. And the reason I chose that word is because these problems require that we come together and learn together. And I think that actually connects to the humility that Marina just mentioned. We do not know it all. You know, there's no one person that can possibly tackle this alone, and you have to be open to learning. And so I think from my experience, the people that engage in interdisciplinary scholars are those that truly embrace that concept of lifelong learning. No matter if you have a PhD or 3 PhDs, you're still up to learn more. And so that was my take. I'm going to go through, folks, in the same order that we started with our initial introductions. And so, Verena, that means back to you.
Open-mindedness. And I don't think it needs an explanation.
Very fair, very fair. All right, Lauren.
I'd say collaboration, and I think that ties in with the learning and the open-mindedness, true collaboration.
Thank you. Alexia.
In fact, I have the same word like you, Stephen. I mean, it's learning, and let me just add, it's learning not only with but also from others. I think that's important.
Fantastic. And Gerhard.
Well, I would pick like seeing a problem from a different angle, and also finding solutions then which I would not be able to do alone.
Fantastic. And that, folks, draws us to a close. And I think that, you know, those are important words. I think that do a nice job of hitting on some of the themes that we covered today. So learning, open-mindedness, being collaborative, you know, bringing different viewpoints together, diverse viewpoints, diverse ways of knowing. I would like to think that all of you enjoyed this session. I know I certainly did. I'm very thankful to my colleagues, our panelists, for joining us today. I'm thankful for our 2 scholarly societies for bringing us together to allow us to engage in this way. And I'm also thankful to all 42 of you who are in the audience who have provided us with questions and some comments to help keep the discussion going in a very spirited way. And so with that, I hope you will join all of us on our quest to tackle some of these big problems and do so through an interdisciplinary lens. But I think what you also heard today is that that's not the only approach, that we certainly need to have that strong foundation to build upon. And so when we talk about solving these problems, there's really space for everyone. And that's sort of a global message that we need to continue to share. And it's not just for scholars, it's for the communities that we also interact with and serve and are a part of. So with that, thank you so much.